it was hard. Yeah, I mean, I miss it. You know, somebody asked you, would you like to race again? No. I don't want to race again. I wouldn't mind taking somebody's car to Eldora and running against the fence for a little while, but, you know, the 102 or 3 or 4 races a year and going through all that, I was tired. I was burned out. I had a bad attitude because I knew we didn't have any money coming in. I mean, it was hard to quit, but, I mean, it was just a decision that had to be made, and fortunately, I think I made the right decision. I got out without any injuries, and so, I don't know.
Ladies and gentlemen, after the success of my first Vanish Talents video, part 2 is finally here. But for this episode, it's gonna be a bit different, as a couple of drivers on this list are still somewhat involved in racing. As most of you know, this series is focused on drivers who had unexpected retirements and aren't really involved in racing anymore. But since people often wonder what happened to these specific drivers, they will be featured on today's list. So with that being said, let's get right into the video. Joey Saldana, better known as the Brownsburg Bullet, is one of the most legendary drivers in World of Outlaws history. His calm demeanor, along with 105 victories with the series, has made him a fan favorite. His father Joe played a huge part in his racing career. While he only raced around 4 years for his father, it had prepared Joey for the rest of his racing career, especially in the physical aspect. On the Open Red podcast, Joey went over the time him and his father went to a race at Granite City, where there was a man running around the local football field. His father asked him who it was, and of course he didn't know. Well, long behold, it was Doug Wolfgang. Right in that moment, Joe taught him the importance of physical strength, and it doesn't matter the amount of money you have, if you outdo your opponents on a physical level, it will pay off. Right then and there is when Joey began focusing on being physically fit, which persisted through the rest of his career. Joey's beginnings in racing were quite interesting. Unlike most drivers today, where they'll start off racing 305s or 360s, Joey actually jumped straight into a 410, which of course gave him quite the challenge at the start, but this discipline did help him in the long run. The early 90s is when Joey kicked off his racing career, gathering a total of 13 recorded victories until 1995, where he had a historic season with the All-Stars, collecting 18 victories, breaking the record for most wins in a season, which from my understanding still stands today. Not only did he succeed with the All-Stars that season, he also did earn his first ever Outlaw victory at I-96. Funny enough, he placed 5th in points that season, even with 18 victories. What's funny about this is the 2 years prior to this, he placed 3rd in points, but didn't even get half the amount of wins he did in 95. But looking back, the competition for the championship was absolutely stacked, especially with Dale Blaney earning 12 victories and 57 top 5 finishes. On the off-season, Joey traveled to Australia to compete with the World Series Sprint cars, claiming 1 victory, which put him in 2nd place, right behind Brooke Tatnall. He traveled back to Australia several more times throughout his career, even claiming both the Grand Annual Sprint Car Classic and the President's Cup. Once he returned to the US, Joey kicked off his first ever full-time season with the Outlaws, where he averaged around 12th place with a handful of top 5s. He returned to the All-Stars the following year, which he stayed with until 2000. In the span of those 3 years, Joey gathered a total of 25 wins with the All-Stars, with his most successful season being in '98, where he placed 2nd in points, so close to winning the championship. Once Joey returned to the Outlaws, he quickly found his footing, claiming 4 victories in a span of 2000 and 2001, then doubling that his 2002 season, gathering 8 victories including the coveted Kings Royal. This was Joey's most impressive season yet. 8 wins along with his first ever Kings Royal really established him as a force to be reckoned with. As Jeff Peck 8588 comments, a defining moment in Joey's career. This really propelled him to the top of the sport, and the rest is history. Fast forward to 2006, Joey already had a total of 22 Outlaw victories to his name, but that quickly changed after signing with Kasey Kahne Racing. In his first year with the team, Joey won his 2nd and final Kings Royal, along with a 2nd place finish at the Knoxville Nationals, doing the same the following year and for a 3rd time in 2009. In 2007, Joey came the closest he's ever been to winning a championship, falling 146 points short to Donnie Schatz, then having his most successful year in 2009, claiming an impressive 20 victories. Fun fact, only 6 drivers in the history of the World of Outlaws have been able to win 20 or more races in one season, those being Steve Kinzer, Sammy Swindell, Doug Wolfgang, Mark Kinzer, Donnie Schatz, and of course Joey Saldana. Midway through the 2011 season, Joey got caught in a pileup on the 13th lap of the King's Royal.
One thing about you, Brad Sweet, and Lynch is into the wall. Joey Saldana caught up in it as well. And it all began with Lynch and Brad Sweet getting together.
While it may not have looked too extreme, this crash ended up breaking Joey's right arm, along with 5 broken ribs which contributed to a punctured lung. This caused doctors to insert 2 plates and 25 screws into his arm. Of course, this kept Joey out of the car for a while, but with lots of physical rehab and being in good shape, Joey was able to return just 2 months later, where he won back-to-back at Hartford and Eldora, the same track he was injured in 2 months prior. Joey has stated in the past that this was the worst injury of his career. While he did have broken bones in the past, for instance 2009 where he broke his hand, he was still able to compete in all 65 races that season. But the Eldora crash was a bit different, as it was life-threatening. Following Joey and Kasey Kahne Racing's departure after the 2012 season, he raced for several iconic cars through the last 9 years of his career, those being the Motor 71, Roth 83, which he had raced with before partially in 96 and 01, the Rudine 26, and a couple more. His final full-time season was in 2016, but still raced around half the schedule for 2017 and 2018. In early 2021, after over 30 years of racing, including 105 Outlaw victories and 74 All-Star victories, Joey stepped away from racing. Like what most drivers experience, life on the road was getting difficult, as he was away from his family a lot, and it was difficult for him to find solid rides later on in his career. His departure from full-time racing gave him lots of time to spend with his family, which has always been a main priority. With as successful Joey was, you'd be surprised to hear that he wasn't always confident with his ability in racing. I always felt like I was never good enough to be racing with the Outlaws for 18 years. I never felt like I was winning enough or achieving enough. I was always comparing myself to Donnie Schatz, and he was on a totally different level. Donnie set a pretty high bar, and I did my best to compete with him. The fans may think I wasn't a personable person, but I always felt like I needed to do a better job. I always felt like I could achieve more, do more, and I struggled with that. If you look at the statistics between 2006 and 2010, it's evident that these were Joey's prime years. 2006, 3rd place, 2007, 2nd place, 2008, 4th place, 2009, 3rd place. You see, all of these have one thing in common. Donnie Schatz was at the top. As Joey said, Donnie set a pretty high bar, making it extremely difficult to beat him in points, unfortunately leaving Joey without a championship. Now, out of all the drivers we've went over on this series, I think we can all agree that Joey was the most likable. Not only was he one hell of a driver, he would also just keep to himself mostly, which in return kept him out of controversy. That is something you rarely see nowadays. As of his career, here's just a brief list of Joey's accomplishments. I'm probably missing a lot, there's just so many it's kind of hard to track every single one. As far as what he's doing now, Joey acquired an oil tank company in 2020 and now works as an oil tank manufacturer alongside commercial real estate. Also, from what I've been told, he now crew chiefs for his son Reese, as it looks like he's following in his father's footsteps. And finally, on June 3rd of this year, Joey was inducted into the National Sprint Car Hall of Fame, implementing himself in history as one of the most talented drivers to race a sprint car. Stevie Smith is one of the most legendary drivers to come out of Pennsylvania. 84 Outlaw victories along with 3 Williams Grove National Opens and 11 PA Speedweek victories. I guess you can say he made a name for himself. Similar to Joey Saldana, Stevie's father also raced, which played a huge part with his interest in the sport. His beginnings in racing were actually quite rough, as he didn't really have the money to put a car together. Stevie went around for years, asking around, doing whatever he can to start racing. And after a couple years went by, he was finally able to put a car together thanks to Jeff Creasy, which was the man who did the decals on his father's cars. Within 6 months the car was complete, just in time for the beginning of the season. With a freshly made car and one of his dad's backup engines, Stevie headed over to Williams Grove for his first ever race. Yeah, Williams Grove. As you probably expected, it didn't go too well for him. Stevie actually contemplated whether or not he wanted to continue racing after that first night, as his arms were so sore due to not having any power steering. After a few years went by, Stevie already had several wins and a track championship at Lincoln. He continued building up his team, improving more and more every season, then eventually claiming his first ever Outlaw victory in 1988. This caught the attention of legendary car owner Al Hamilton, and Stevie began piloting the 77 in 1989, where he claimed his first ever Williams Grove National Open. After only one season, Hamilton was ready to go full time. It was a bit rough for Stevie at the start, but he eventually found his footing, claiming 4 victories in a span of 90 and 91, including his second National Open. The year of 1992 is when Stevie began showing what he can really do on the Outlaw Tour, claiming 8 victories that season, falling 509 points short to Steve Kinzer. Yeah, it was kind of hard to win a championship when he had Steve averaging around 30 to 40 wins a season. He followed up with an 11-win season in 1993, which was his most successful year with Hamilton until his departure from the team midway through the 94 season. He drove the 12X for pretty much the rest of the season, then finding a ride in the Motor 71, racing a total of 2 seasons with the team, then switching over to his own team in 97. Through those 5 years piloting the 19, he racked up an outstanding 41 victories, with 14 of those being in his 98 season alone, which is his highest statistical season. After his sponsorship with Ingersoll Rand expired, Stevie competed in his final full-time season in 2002, with the 11H owned by Dave Helm. Even after stepping away from full-time racing, his talent carried on through the rest of his career. His most notable moments in the 2000s were the multiple event wins he had in Ohio and Pennsylvania, like the Brad Doty Classic, the Silver Cup, the Bob Weicker Memorial, and even the 2009 Ohio Speed Week title. Also, can't forget about his second place finish in the Mopar Million, where he took home over $100,000. It's actually crazy how well he did, considering this was only his second day in a non-wing.
I know you have a lot of success with that wing on the car, but after this kind of night, you might want to take that thing off more often.
Well, they're all asking me that. Are you going to run more races without the wing? I said, hell no, I can't wait to get that wing back on, but I might change my mind.
For the early 2010s, it was a bit rough for Stevie, but this didn't stop him from winning more events, like the 2011 Tusky 50, the Kevin Goldberg Memorial, and another Ohio Speed Week title. But as the mid-2010s were coming around, he had really stepped up his game while piloting that iconic 51. The year that stands out the most is definitely 2015, where he claimed a total of 10 victories, with 5 of those being in the Pennsylvania Speed Week alone. This in itself earned him his first and only Pennsylvania Speed Week title, which was of course a huge achievement. But later that year,
into turn 3, Donnie Schatz closing in on Stevie in the final turn. Schatz trying to make it a run, but it'll be Stevie Smith winning his 3rd National Open. Donnie Schatz in 2nd.
After almost a quarter of a century, Stevie won his 3rd and final Williams Grove National Open. As he's stated in the past, this specific National Open is one of his most proud moments. To be able to win this much so late in your career is honestly very impressive. Those 3 years with Raymer were so iconic, and it was one of Stevie's most successful years. He touched up on this on the Open Red podcast, and I really think you guys should give it a listen. Here's the clip.
Oh, I think it was 3 years, and that was 3 of my very best years, for many reasons. You know, if you'd asked me 10 years ago, you think would you drive for Fred Raymer, I think both of us would have laughed at you, you know, and it's not something you ever plan, but I was coming off my worst 2 or 3 years I've ever even could have imagined, success-wise, and he comes up to me and wants to know if I'll drive his car. Well, you know, that decision was made before he got the last word out. I was like, yeah, I think that sounds like a good plan. So, and his boy Freddie and him and what they've done, what they did for me those 3 years was just just reminded me how fun racing was, because it was a tough, 3, 4, 5 years there in between, and just things weren't going good, and I just thought I was getting too old, and here comes Fred and Freddie, and they just give me a race car that goes around the racetrack, and I'm right back I'm right back up front. So
2015 was Stevie's last consequential year. Even though he raced in 2016, it wasn't as eventful. His reason for retirement is actually very simple. Prior to the 2017 season, Stevie retired from racing entirely to focus on his company SMIFF Titanium. While he is busy with his company, you can occasionally spot him at the races, as they dedicated a race to his late father, Steve Smith. He even did some practice laps last year in his father's honor. In 2019, Stevie was inducted into the National Sprint Car Hall of Fame. He amassed a total of 222 victories in his career, along with a ton of events. Stevie currently resides in Broken Arrow, Oklahoma, and is happy as can be. With his company making parts that many drivers use, he is always involved in the sport. Stevie describes it as, "I'm still sort of racing, I'm just retired from driving." He currently sits 12th in all-time wins with the Outlaws, and according to PenLive.com, Stevie is the 4th best driver in PA Speedweek history. This final driver had possibly one of the most abrupt and unexpected retirements in the sport's history. Andy Hillenburg, better known as Oklahoma Andy, had a short but interesting career. Starting off in the mid-80s, Andy's career kicked off with a bang, winning his first ever race in the sprint car, even after flipping in the heat and starting dead last in the feature. The amount of natural talent it takes just to win a race in the sprint car, let alone your first ever race, is just insane. Through his first season or two, Andy raced for a handful of different people before him and his father opened up their own team in the late 80s. He competed in his first full-time season in 1988, grabbing a handful of second place finishes with 11 top 5s in total. The following season, Andy claimed his first ever Outlaw victory at the defunct Ascot Park, then later on in the season claiming a second victory at Duke City. In 1990, he missed around 60 races due to his wife being pregnant, then missing the whole 91 season as he was trying to shift over to NASCAR. He quickly returned in 1992, and I guess you can say the rest is history. After his return, it only took him about a year to get back on his feet, claiming a, at the time, career high of 9 victories. This was a huge jump compared to what he had his previous seasons. After acquiring the STP sponsorship, Andy headed into the mid-90s with much expectation that was of course met. In 1994, not only did he claim 6 victories, including the Chico Gold Cup, he also won the Chili Bowl. He placed 3rd in points, which is the closest he's ever been to winning the title. He went on to claim his 2nd Gold Cup in 1995, then a 2nd place finish in the King's Royal in 96. The late 90s weren't as eventful for Andy, but there's one event that I would like to bring up. In 1999 and 2000, Heartland Park built a temporary dirt track on top of the drag strip. It became an event with the Outlaws for 2 years, even becoming a 3-night event in 2000. Now you may be wondering why I would mention this. Well, Andy absolutely kicked ass on this track. After his feature win, you can just hear the relief in his voice, as he hadn't placed in the top 5 in exactly a month.
Team's been struggling, but a big, great win tonight.
I tell you what, this feels great. Man, we've been struggling. I mean, we have. And I don't mean to take up a bunch of time, but I got to thank my sponsors. I mean, they've been behind me through this deal, and it looks like we got going tonight. So.
The following year, Luxair became Andy's primary sponsor. This was yet again another huge sponsor for Andy, and this partnership was arguably the best at the time. I mean, how can you not appreciate how iconic these commercials are? He of course won the following year's O'Reilly Shootout, but other than that, there wasn't much to highlight until 2001. Off the bat, he already claimed 2 victories, those being the season opener at Colorado Speedway, then Las Vegas the following weekend. In a total, Andy claimed 10 victories with 37 top 5 finishes, ultimately placing 6th in points. This was an extremely impressive year for Andy, and it looked like he was going to have an even brighter future. But this was his final season. You're probably wondering, why would he quit at the top of his game? Well, as most of you guys know, he ran with his own team for pretty much his whole career. This in return costed him a lot of money, so he was dependent on sponsors. After the Luxair sponsorship ended and the company was moving on to other things, Andy was left without a sponsor. Now, prior to the end of the season, after finding out Luxair was going to be parting ways, Andy had made a promise to himself and his wife that if he didn't get a sponsor, he was going to retire. Unfortunately, that was the case, and Andy hasn't been in a sprint car since. Even though Andy was considered a popular driver, interviews with him now are rather scarce compared to other drivers. The only two I could find was, of course, the Open Red podcast and the interview on Methanol Moonshine's channel. I highly suggest you guys go check out that video, the link will be in the description down below. To sum it all up, Andy's career may have been short compared to other drivers, but he was still a huge part of the Outlaws in the 90s and especially the early 2000s. The things Andy did achieve during his career were really remarkable, especially his Chili Bowl win in '94, being the first Oklahoman to do so and also putting Broken Arrow on the map. After researching his career for this video, it made me realize how much of a badass driver he was, so I picked up a couple things on eBay and I think it looks really good on my wall of fame. After 17 years of racing, including a total of 42 Outlaw victories, I'd put him up next to Mark Kinzer as one of the most mysterious vanished talents. This is Sprint Car Nation, and I'll see you guys next time.